Who wants to get high? Yeah? You up for some? Shall we really get this party started, shall we? Yeah. You in the mood? Yeah. Excellent. I've got tons. You're up for it, and there's loads there. Look at this. I've got cocaine, ecstasy, speed, yeah? But mine are all fair trade, organic, and 100% legal. Ted approves. I checked, so don't worry. Today, I'm going to talk about how to start a speech. And that is how every speaker should start their speech, by getting the audience high. Because let's face it, when most speeches start, delighted to be here, our head droops, our heart sinks, oh, for God's sake. Studies of students at universities show their brain activity levels during lectures are actually lower than they are when they're asleep. Actually lower, not the same as, or a bit higher, actually lower. And no speaker wants that. We want our speakers high, not low, right from the get-go. And we want to lift their heart right from the start. So today I am going to set out 3 ways that you can start your speech, 3 different drugs that you can deal, depending on how you want your audience to feel. The first drug that we can deal is dopamine. This is the one that we want to go for if we want our audience to feel like that. Dopamine is the pleasure drug. It makes us feel strong, satisfied, wonderful. It's the drug that's released naturally when we finish a Sudoku or start ticking things off a list. So how do we get that going in a speech? Simple. We start with a joke. There are heaps of websites and books full of one-liners and anecdotes just waiting to be reused and recycled. Most speakers have 1 or 2 of these up their sleeve that they're just ready to shuffle out any time that they want to. And it doesn't matter whether it's an old shaggy dog story or a Churchill anecdote or a Seinfeld one-liner, as long as it makes people laugh. That's all that matters. So my own go-to gag, if I can try it on you, is one about Einstein. So Einstein, during the 1920s, he was going basically all over Europe, making the same speech over and over again about the theory of relativity. On one of these occasions, his driver was taking him there, and his driver said, "Oh, for God's sake, you doing that same bloody speech again today? I swear I've heard you do this so many times now. I could deliver it myself, word for word." And Einstein, who had a mischievous sense of humour, said, "Okay then, I've got an idea. Why don't I dress like the driver, and I'll stand at the back of the room, and you deliver my lecture, and we'll see how you do, right?" Driver's like, "All right, we'll give it a go. And Einstein stood at the back of the room, and he watched with wonder as his driver delivered this incredibly complicated lecture, absolutely word perfect. But then someone in the audience asked this humdinger of a question. So complicated, no layman could have dared to understand it, but the driver, he did not miss a beat. He said, "Very good question. And of course, it sounds very complicated, but the answer to it is so simple, even my driver can tell you." So anyone can learn a gag like that. But it's also worth having a few one-liners up your sleeve, just for in case anything goes wrong at the beginning, as it invariably does. So someone laughs or cheers embarrassingly loudly. "So glad you came, Mum." A phone rings halfway through your speech. "Can you tell Barack I'm busy right now, but I'll call him straight back?" There's a crash at the back of the room. Look, I don't mind people checking their watch when I get up to speak. I do object when they collapse to the floor. Or the technology fails, as invariably happens, and you can always use every bloke's ultimate fallback line. "I'm so sorry. This has never happened to me before." The power of self-deprecatory humour is immense. It reduces even the most pompous speaker and elevates the audience, making them feel superior, which is why, of course, they love it. It's also a sign of supreme confidence on the part of the speaker. And so the late comedian, the late great Bob Monkhouse was a master of this. Everybody laughed when I said I wanted to be a comedian. Ha! They're not laughing anymore, are they? Or I saw a businessman start a speech the other day where he opened up, remembering this conversation that he'd had with his wife at the breakfast table this morning, where he turned to her and said, "Did you ever, in your wildest dreams, imagine that one day I would be running one of the largest companies on the planet?" To which she replied, "Darling, you never featured in any of my wildest dreams." Or the politician I saw giving a speech the other day where he opened up saying, "Last week, I dreamt I was giving a speech to the House of Lords. And then I woke up and discovered I actually was giving a speech to the House of Lords." So these are the kind of ways we want to open if we want our audience looking like that. But we don't always want our audience looking like that. Sometimes we want our audience looking a little bit like this. If that's the case, the drug we deal is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the empathy drug, the love drug. It makes us feel all warm, fuzzy, and gooey. It's the same hormone that's released naturally when mothers are breastfeeding, when we're holding hands, cuddling, making love, or when we're listening to a great speech. Because great speeches always include stories. You think about any of the great speeches that you've seen over the last year, and I'm thinking Oprah Winfrey, Pink, Michelle Obama, Emma Watson, people like this. They're all telling stories. And you see, this is the thing. There's a myth about speech making, that you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them it, and then you tell them what you've just told them. And that is like, tell your audience you're going to be boring, then be boring, and then tell your audience you've just been boring. You can't stamp a point into someone's head. And in fact, the only reaction that is likely to get is it's going to make them want to stamp you on the head in return. Simply asserting to an audience something like, "Our values matter, our corporate values matter," has zero persuasive value. So what you find the best speakers will do is they'll make their points, but they'll be wrapped up in a story. And I mean a good story, like a movie or a novel, where you have a strong hero, scary antagonists, and a big, big goal. The story might be metaphorical, like Churchill's Iron Curtain, or Hillary Clinton smashing through the glass ceiling, or Donald Trump draining the swamp. The story might be historical, from someone we admire, like Cleopatra to Confucius, Malala to Mandela, Jane Austen to John Lennon. But for me, the best stories are the personal ones. So I'm going to tell you God honest truth. As I was coming here today, I had a call with my wife where my wife was in tears because this afternoon her sister had a baby boy. And this is absolutely true. So can we please have a round of applause for my sister-in-law, Zoe. And she's in Shrewsbury at the moment, and a bit of my heart is there now because I've got two daughters. I've got Charlotte, who's 9, and Alice, who's 6. And Zoe was with us when both of those little girls were born. And I tell you, I remember when Alice was born. Charlotte was born, and it was a doddle. When Alice was born, it was very, very difficult. The maternity ward was understaffed, and she ended up being born very, very quickly. And as a result, when she was born, she was struggling to breathe. And so she went into the special care unit for the first 9 days of her life. And she's absolutely fine now, before anyone worries, back at school today. But the thing was that this was the worst time of my life, because we didn't know whether she was going to make it through or not. Me and my wife were literally going to the hospital every waking hour and checking on her. I was drawing pictures of her because we thought that that was all that we might have. You know, my mother-in-law came down to stay to look after our eldest daughter, so as if things weren't hard enough. But the thing that I really remember about this is that all of the time when I was going in there to see Alice, in the incubator next to her, there were 2 twins. And they were the tiniest babies that I have ever seen before in my whole life. And they were so small, you could hold them in the palm of your hand like that. It was a miracle they were alive. And all the time, me and my wife were going in to see Alice. No one came in to see these twins. No one, not once. And whereas Alice had her name on her incubator, Alice Elizabeth Lancaster, these twins, the charts marking their progress, were simply marked A and B. I asked the doctor who ran the ward what the story was, and she said, they were born to a teenage girl from the valleys who had given them up for adoption. And so you see, I think back to that, and I think about how Alice, we had everything ready for her. Her cot was ready, her room was ready, her sister couldn't wait to play with her, Auntie Zoe couldn't wait to play with her, grandparents couldn't wait to take her out to the park. You know, we knew what school she was going to, everything was sorted out. And for these 2 little twins, what did they have? What future lies ahead for them? So if there's one thing I think we should all be trying to do, it's trying to make sure that kids like that have the same opportunities we would wish for our own children. Don't you? So was that more persuasive? Forgive me sharing the story, but you kind of do have to do it to demonstrate what's happened. And the thing is that if we went round now and we checked all of your blood levels, what we would find for most of you would be higher levels of oxytocin. Because we've connected, you've shared my story, you've seen the world through my eyes. Not for all of you. On the balance of probability, at least 6 of the people in this room are actually psychopathic and incapable of empathy. And by the way, I think I've got you. I know which ones you are. But for the rest of you, you would have higher levels of oxytocin, and this is critical. The neuroscientist Paul Zak has shown there's a direct correlation between our oxytocin levels and our susceptibility to persuasion. And he's carried out a series of fascinating experiments in this, including one where people were asked to lend money to a stranger. And he found that not only could you predict who would give money to strangers based on nothing more than their oxytocin levels, you could even predict how much money they would give them. It's absolutely extraordinary. So there's the real clinch, stories entertain, stories persuade, but stories get people to give you money, And this, of course, is why Children in Need is so successful. It's why stories feature so prominently within advertising campaigns, and it's why stories are a great way for you to start your speech if you want your audience to look a little bit like that. But we don't always want our audience looking like that. Sometimes we want our audience looking a little bit like this. So how do we do that? How do we make them look like that? What's the answer? How do we do it? Come on. How do we do it? For goodness sake. Well, just like that. We ask a question. All of your faces now. That's absolutely right, like that. This is the university lecture. How to wake up your audience. And the thing is that when you ask an audience a question like that, they have increased levels of cortisol. Cortisol is the stress drug, the fear drug. It raises our heartbeat, focuses our attention, increases our energy levels. It gets us ready for fight or flight. Very, very instinctive. And you get it by asking questions. And so this is why asking questions is something you'll see real high-pressure speakers do, like evangelists or salesmen or stand-up comedians. If they want to shut up the audience, they'll just flip it back on them. And you see very powerful speakers doing it as well. So it might be an emotional question. You could ask an emotional question. How many of you have lost someone that you really loved? It could be a factual question. Did you know that the richest 46 people on the planet have the same wealth as the poorest 50% of people on the planet? You could fit the richest people on a double-decker bus. It could be a kind of philosophical question. Why are we all here today? Why are we meeting today? Not yesterday, not tomorrow, but here and now. What is it that's brought us together? What magical force is it that's brought us together? Are we just here to swap business cards? Or are we here because we've got something deeper in common? The best speakers, though, will ask kind of prolonged questions which present like a moral dilemma. And there's one guy I saw do this absolutely amazingly not so long ago. And so he opened up like this. He said, right, it's 1935, India, and you're Mahatma Gandhi. You are running to catch a train just as the train is leaving the station. And as you board the train, one of your sandals comes off and falls under the train onto the track. What do? Do you board the train, carry on, getting on the train? Or do you go back to the platform so you can retrieve your sandal? I'd like you just to think about that. We'll come back to that at the end. All of us, what? Completely threw us. And then he went into the body of his speech where he started talking about leadership, his theories on leadership, and it was all stories and questions and jokes. And all the time, I couldn't get this image of Gandhi out of my mind. It was just absolutely, it was wedged in my mind. And then it got to the end of his speech, and almost as an afterthought, he said, oh yes, Gandhi, the station. He asked for a show of hands. So how many people would have got on the train? He asked for a show of hands. People put their hands up. How many of you would have gone back to retrieve your sandal? Fantastic. Well, let me tell you what Gandhi actually did. What he did was he took off his remaining sandal and he threw it onto the track under the train. And when his companion said, why did you do that? Gandhi replied, well, so whoever finds them has a complete pair of sandals for them to wear. Genius. A question and a story. And it makes so many points, doesn't it? Like about values, about compassion, thinking rationally under pressure, about showing there's always an alternative to fight or flight. But critically, it creates feelings. And that's what all of this is about. Questions, stories, jokes, they create feelings. As Maya Angelou wrote, people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never, ever forget how you made them feel. And this guy, he made us feel amazing. We felt connected. We felt as one. And this is what great speakers do. And it's how they create followers, and it's how they build movements with the promise of feelings. Making us feel joyful, making us feel proud, making us feel connected, making us feel like we belong, making us feel part of something bigger than ourselves. That's what keeps us coming back, and that's what gets us addicted, because we are always craving more, and great leaders always keep us wanting more. Which takes me to my final point. How do you end a speech? Well, There's only one way to do that,